Hey there, I'm Tim Bray, and this is Breno de Madeiros.
Hi there.
And we are both in the identity group here at Google, and we kind of think that identity is one of the biggest pain points on the internet. And Google's all about removing pain points on the internet because, we want you to be online all the time. So the center of the pain point is passwords, of course, and remembering passwords sucks, and typing in passwords sucks, and typing in passwords on mobile devices deeply, deeply sucks. And this pain point's been around for a while. And so there's been a bunch of technologies dreamed up by the industry over the years to try and solve it. And most of them have gone nowhere. But we've been working on this for a while, and Google's betting pretty heavily on a couple of these technologies. One of them is called OAuth 2.0, and then there's some other stuff built on top of that, like OpenID Connect. And Breno here is the tech lead of the team that's actually building all this stuff. And he's also got his name on the front of a bunch of those specs. And I don't know how closely you people have been watching this stuff, but that process ground on for a long time, and it was really controversial, and the editor flounced out of the room saying everything sucked, life sucked, the internet sucked, and the specs weren't frozen forever and ever, and yet, here's Google betting on them, and they do things like send, bearer tokens in the open and so on. So are we crazy? Do they really suck? Is OAuth good enough for Google to be betting on?
OAuth 2 has many very good and flexible features that makes us think that is the right fit for the internet at this point. A lot of the criticism of OAuth 2 was based on two grounds. There was some criticism on the basis that the security was not good enough. There was some criticism on the basis that OAuth 2 was too complex. The complexity argument, I think, is just unfair. OAuth 2 is essentially a suite of protocols. It has a number of specialized flows. So if you look at the entire spec suite, it looks like a lot. But typically, you come to OAuth 2 trying to solve a specific problem. And when you come with that perspective, OAuth 2 has a simple answer to the problem you're trying to solve. And so the complexity argument, I think, doesn't hold much water. On the security argument, we do have a lot of experience with addressing hard security issues in the internet, and the fact that we're betting so heavily on OAuth 2 means that we are confident we can make it work securely.
Excellent. Now, it's been changing and changing. Are they finished? They're still a working group.
There is still a working group. Essentially, the RFC is finalized.
There's actually an RFC number now.
There is an RFC number, and there is still some extensions that are being worked on with OAuth 2. I think the most important one to keep track of is the OpenID Connect, which is a separate working group, but it's designed to be an identity layer on top of OAuth 2.
Okay, so we're betting on it. What are we actually doing? What do we have in production? What's out there?
So there are a couple of things out there. From the point of view of our APIs, Google has been making an enterprise-wide effort to put together make our APIs work more homogeneously, more easy to use. And OAuth 2 is a big part of this. So we are baking OAuth 2 in all our APIs and documenting this, and we are hoping. We're getting good feedback from developers.
Well, that's a big deal because I've only been involved in this for a while, but up until quite recently, the developer experience on OAuth was horrible. It was hard to find good libraries, and then there were 11 steps, and you had to have a deep understanding of cryptography and so on. And particularly on mobile, it just was no there. So how are we doing?
In mobile is one of the places where I think we have a good story in OAuth 2. Really very different from what was there before. The new platform for authorization on Android has essentially a way to get tokens based on activities. So the experience of an application that's built, the user experience of interacting with an application that was built on these new platforms is that the app brings the activity to let the user choose which account they want to use with the application. And after the user chooses the account, then they are shown an approval prompt. And if they decide to go forward with it, which in the vast majority of the cases they said is the case, and so then they will be right back into the application, and after that the application has to trigger an activity to obtain a token and access the user data from our Google APIs with the user's consent.
Cool. Yeah, I wrote one of those apps, and it's not all that simple because it's not synchronous, because you might have to go off to the network to ask for the token, and you might actually have to go back to the user to check for their consent and so on. So it's asynchronous, but it's not terrible. Another thing we've been working on that isn't actually a Google product, it's an OpenID Foundation product, is this thing called Account Chooser. And if you go to my blog at tbray.org, I did a piece on it yesterday, I guess. And I think that's a big deal. It's not a Google product, as I said. It's a chunk of open source JavaScript from the OpenID Foundation, and what it is trying to offer is one-click login, and even in some cases one-click sign-up on sites. So when you go to some site, you don't see that site's landing page. You see just a list of the accounts you've used to log on to various other places. You click one, pop, you're in, one click. It's still, just starting to lurch into life, but I think it's going to reduce login friction quite a bit around the net.
Yeah, and Account Chooser is a great idea. It basically addresses the issue of what we call the NASCAR problem, which is the fact that the moment that you try to accept sign-ins from a different provider, say Google, Yahoo, Microsoft Live, Facebook, you are presented with the problem of how to render your login page. What are the options they're going to put there? So Account Chooser gives you a simple and clean answer to that question.
Cool. Let me ask another question. There's a million Android developers out there. Well, not literally, but there's really a lot of Android developers out there. And almost every Android app has a back end. I mean, even the most simple game will have some sort of a back end to persist and share high scores or something like that. And so the guy who's writing the code for the back end has a problem, which is, how do they know who they're talking to? I mean, how do I know this is Joe's high score at solitaire as opposed to Sally's? And you don't want them to have to go and log into your site again because they've already approved access to the site. So how do I make that easy for the back-end developer?
So as I mentioned, we have a number of different flows that are designed to address this issue. This particular problem is going to be addressed in the new release of the Android authorization. And what it does is, which is very soon, and what it allows you to do is to get a simple, what we call an ID token, an authentication token that the phone can get without any additional consent, except the initial consent to identify the user. They can provide essentially a login token to their website, and so you don't have to build your own authorization protocol to authenticate your device back to the home server.
Excellent. So stand by and watch for that. Okay, so I think we've talked enough, and let's see what people want to talk to us. Now, I see we've got some questions on the moderator, and I understand there may be some coming in over YouTube, so let me sort those. So I'm going to skip the first question because it isn't really about identity. Okay, our thoughts on Mozilla's Persona project. It looks promising, simple for users and developers, decentralized, and based on pragmatic choices. And actually, they left out one thing. The people who are promoting Persona are making very strong claims about privacy. The fact that logins won't be logged anywhere. So it looks very promising. It's kind of complicated. I'm pretty sure that the ecosystem of identity providers is going to be complicated. It's going to be multi-provider, multi-protocol. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Persona was one of the protocols in there. And if it's hard to hook Account Chooser up to it, then that's a bug in Account Chooser. The one issue I had with Persona that I haven't been able to get a straight answer on yet is, what's the story on mobile devices? Because anything you're going to do on identity these days, if it doesn't have a good answer for mobile device app programmers, it's just not very interesting. But Persona looks like a good effort. We talk to them on a regular basis, and good for them.
And there is an interesting overlap, I believe, between Persona and Account Chooser, where Account Chooser has many interesting privacy features. The settings are stored only locally on your client. On the other hand, it has a very simple JavaScript-only interface. That means that it works in every browser, essentially, including mobile platforms. And so there is some possibility, for instance, for clients to extend the behavior of Account Chooser. We think there's a possibility for these efforts to converge further.
That's right. In fact, we've had some informal talk about browser builders building account chooser right into the browser. And I would hope that would snap on to things like Persona very nicely. Okay.
So there's one question on YouTube I wanted to address, Tim and Breno. One of the conversations is about authorization, and when you give authorization to your identity, that often they ask for non-essential details. For example, your photos. So if you're trying to share a high score for a game, they also ask for permission to your photos. How do you address the kind of that granular permissions issue that's available there?
So our API authorizations have a concept of scope, which is actually also a concept of the OAuth 2 protocol. And what it means is that a developer that wants to use OAuth 2 with Google, they'll typically target one or more of the Google APIs. And when they look at the documentation of the APIs, they'll find out what scopes they need to use, they need to request to have access to that type of data. And the consent page, you have a single consent page that will disclose to the user everything that the app is requesting access to.
I notice in OpenID Connect, they thought about that a lot. If you look at OpenID Connect, they've got some very, very well-defined scopes. So when you want to go through that protocol and establish identity, you can say, all I care about is the email. Just, here's this email. Is this person actually logged into that email? Yes or no. Or you can actually ask for more. You can say email profile. And the definition of profile varies from provider to provider. For example, I noticed that Google has a picture, but Microsoft Live doesn't last time I looked. And so the selection of information that comes out varies from provider to provider. But first of all, the app that's using this can ask for the minimum, and in many cases they should. And the second important thing is, as far as I know, you always get told what's going to be given up. The scope string always, there's an approval screen saying, this app is asking for this data. And if you get a surprise, you find that it's given more than you thought you were giving access to, that's a bug and something that you should complain about.
Right. And even though, as Tim mentioned, what is actually in the profile of the user changes depending on which OpenID provider you were targeting, there is an expectation about a set of fields and how that are supposed to be commonly found, and there is a standard way to refer to those, so you can at least reuse the parsing, some of that parsing effort.
Okay, let's go back to the moderator for a moment here. Here's one I particularly like. How can relying parties be certain of the veracity of identity providers? If I say I'm me, is that good enough for some access levels and not others? Should government, banks, VeriSign, or someone else be trusted to vouch for our online identity? Well, that's more really of a policy question than a technology question. Now, do bear in mind that all of these identity protocols work over HTTPS, so you can at least be sure that you are talking to the real identity provider. You really are talking to Google or your bank or whoever. And beyond that, you're really into the universe of trust. I mean, would you rather trust Facebook or Google or your bank or your VeriSign or your university? That's a question of real-world policy. The thing, though, is that for many people who want to offer websites, the business of running a login password system and storing passwords and avoiding being hacked is so onerous and so painful and so expensive that there's a real strong desire to get out of that business and into the mode of using identity providers. So I think that the people are going to want to start using identity providers, and that means that it's really, I think, the task of the identity providers to earn your trust and keep it.
Exactly. The protocols do take on the task of explaining how you can identify the provider in a trustworthy manner, but how much trust you place in the provider is really up to you.
Right. So, App Engine and the recently announced cloud endpoints, still in closed beta, I'm afraid, yes, but I think they're getting close. Support OAuth, and Play services have greatly improved OAuth on Android. Actually, they made it possible. It really wasn't before. So what's the new recommended way of putting all these pieces together? Any good examples? Well, the best example, I think, is the libraries that we provide. We provide pre-cooked libraries in Java and Ruby for using all this stuff, and they just make all that go away. You say, here's the API I want to access, here's who I am, and it goes away and does all the OAuth dance. and that's also going to be work for the web endpoints or cloud endpoints, pardon me, in the App Engine case. So if you can use those, that's a good idea. I myself tend to like building at a lower level and actually using the RESTful endpoints, which means I need to actually do the OAuth dance and get tokens and put tokens on. But even at that painful level, it's not that painful.
Yeah, Tim showed us how to whip up one of these apps in a pinch.
Yeah, we had a bug there earlier this week, and we built like 8 apps in the course of a day to chase it down.
Right. So, I think the Play services is a...
Play services is a big deal for
Right.
Android. It makes so many things possible that weren't before.
And sorry, when I was talking about Android Auth platform before, I really meant the Play services.
So what do you think the future of OAuth is? Aaron Hammer publicly quit. I wouldn't say publicly, I would say loudly quit as editor, and claiming that the specification is more complex, less interoperable, yada, 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 yada. Will there be OAuth 3?
Oh, God. Oh, well. So, will there be OAuth 3? We certainly hope not. And are there problems with interoperability in OAuth 2? Basically, when you're working with an application in OAuth 2, you are targeting APIs that are typically provider-specific. And so what OAuth 2 gives you is a largely reusable framework where you can basically write code once and modify a few bits of configuration and get another provider in the bag. So is that an interoperability problem, or is it an interoperability win?
I would put it like this. It is so an internet protocol like HTTP or SMTP or one of those is truly interoperable. If you have a server that plays by the rules and a client that plays by the rules, you can plug them in together and they just work. So OAuth 2 isn't like that. OAuth 2 is you have this great big piece of machinery that you can operate, and what comes out of it is a token, and then you can use the token to secure your HTTP conversations. But it is not the case that if you write code to use OAuth 2 to access Google APIs, that then you can automatically reuse it for Facebook APIs. It's just that level of interoperability isn't there. I just lost my microphone. I'll just hold it up here like this. I hope that's good enough. On the other hand, the way I think of OAuth 2 is as a framework for building protocols. So the first example of that that's being worked on is OpenID Connect. And OpenID Connect uses the OAuth flows to provide login-like functions. And I think my bet is that OpenID Connect really will be interoperable.
That's right.
If you have a client and a server that play by the rules, they should be able to talk to each other automatically.
Right. And so I think that's the crucial part of this, that OAuth gives you lots of tools, and the tools are very reusable. And so once you have a standard API, and OpenID Connect, for instance, is trying to provide a standard identity API for the web, you can build interoperable protocols based on top of OAuth 2. And I think that's what's important.
So one of the concerns that I often hear about standards is that individual companies will make changes to those standards so that what you might believe is something which is working across all those different networks, it becomes tied to a specific silo with one company's infrastructure. How can we work to not become either another silo or to work with others to make sure that the sign-in that we do on Google works at these other networks also?
Right, so at the OpenID Connect working group, they're doing a really smart thing. They actually have a formal interoperability framework where lots of players are publishing, candidate servers and clients and trying them out and discovering whether they work against each other. And we are actually in the process of rolling out an OpenID Connect endpoint that we are going to claim is conformant to the spec, and that I think if anybody has a client that they claim is conformant to the spec and it doesn't interoperate, I think we take that as a bug.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a very reasonable thing to worry about. It also has to do with the nature of the protocol. Sort of the worst case example of all of that is SQL. SQL is famously non-interoperable. Just because you have something that works with Oracle, there's the chance that it's going to automatically work with a competitor is very small. And the reason for that is designers of SQL, whenever they found a choice. Are we going to do it this way or do it that way? Adopted both. And if you look at the SQL standard, it's immensely large in size, and everything is optional. And for everything, there's multiple ways of doing it. And the number of choices you cut down on increases your chances of getting good interoperability. And I'm kind of a standards veteran, and I'm pretty optimistic about OpenID Connect, at least, that it will have real good interoperability.
Yeah, so trying to make the choices that will work with most and allow the ones that need the special behavior to work on extensions without compromising the interoperability baseline.
To go back to the previous question, one of the things that Aaron said was that OAuth 2 was just insufficiently secure. And I really want to push back on that a little bit. Security, Breno, by the way, is a first-class security expert, which I'm not, so I'll let him tell me what I just said that's wrong. Security is not a binary continuum. You're either, it's where you're either secure or you're insecure. It's a continuous variable. And I think what we're all trying to do is hit an 80-20 point where you have stuff that is secure enough to be usable by ordinary people and ordinary developers, and is still good enough. And my opinion is that OAuth 2 bearer tokens exchanged over TLS, modern HTTPS web connections, is good enough for practical purposes. Now, certain very high security operations may have extra requirements, but I think we're at a good enough level. Breno, as an expert, what do you think?
So, for instance, I definitely think that OAuth 2 has a better balance of security with usability than OAuth 1 did. If you look at the OAuth 1 design, there was a lot more crypto in it, and I'm not afraid of crypto, but I know a lot of people who are, and with good reason. In particular, the way that the OAuth 1 uses crypto is not fully compatible with how HTTP works, which makes people's life a lot harder. They have to deal with problems they normally don't have to deal with in the course of web development. And so also not all benefits were obtained by using crypto in OAuth 1. OAuth 1 didn't worry too much about key management, and so the crypto bits caused more pain than gain from a security perspective. I think a lot of more experienced folks got involved in the design on the OAuth 2, and a lot of the hard edges that we encountered, like Google deployed the OAuth 1 at scale, and we found a lot of hard edges. And we definitely brought our experience. That was the same with many of the other participants in the OAuth 2 effort.
Cool. So I've got one more question here in the moderator, and it's asking about, could a /dot well-known file published to each provider's endpoint help with interoperability? This would describe their implementation responds with JSON. And that's that we're talking about discovery. And it turns out that if I want to do an OpenID Connect interaction with Google or Facebook or something, it turns out that there are 3, 4, at least different endpoints you have to interact with. There's the one for authentication, the one for getting a token, there's user info, there's at least 3 I can think of, maybe more. And so the fact that you're going to google.com or facebook.com doesn't actually tell you enough. So somehow you need to find out what those endpoints are. Well, you can actually just compile them into your code, and if you're only dealing with Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, that's fine, but that's kind of a very limited world, and we can imagine a world where you would also like to get identity from your bank or your university or your state government or whatever. And so there's this notion of discovery, and so there's another project underway in the IETF called WebFinger, which allows you, given an email address, to go find out who their IDP is. And then there's another project called Simple Web Discovery, and there's some other work in the OpenID Connect. And so the answer to the question is yes, that's a good thing, but I don't think those protocols are quite cooked yet.
Right. And even account chooser is a little entry point on start discovering information about the user, for instance, their identity provider. And so you can see that once all these bits are together, we're going to get more mileage with identity and with a broader set of providers, maybe as an out-of-the-box experience for developers.
Okay. Well, I think we've about run through any more voice of the internet questions out there. Okay, folks, thanks everybody for showing up. Let's all remember the internet is a big, scary, dangerous place, and let's be careful with people's passwords, and let's use HTTPS everywhere whenever we can, and let's do good security.
That's right.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you.
And goodbye.